The village lies in ruins. Smoke still rises from collapsed thatched roofs, and the cries of children echo in the distance. But the loudest sound is silence. The silence of women who have just lost everything. The Viking raids were never only about silver or land. They were about people. And in every attack, one group suffered the most: the widows. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, year 876, describes how after Guthrum's forces swept across Wessex, women were left bereft, their protectors gone, their homes in ashes. This silence was not the end of the story. It was the beginning of another kind of conquest. To the Vikings, widows were not free souls mourning their husbands. They were assets. Archaeological excavations at York reveal property deeds where widows were listed alongside cattle and fields, inherited just like objects. In Norse law codes, especially the Gragas from Iceland, widows could be transferred in marriage without their consent if the husband died in battle. Imagine the cruelty. A woman mourning her husband could be claimed by the very man who killed him or sold at the slave market. Records from Dublin's Viking slave market circa 10th century mention 2 young widows exchanged for a silver arm ring. This was not just theft of a life. It was a system that turned grief into profit. But here lies the darkest truth. Most sagas and Norse legends never mention these women. The warriors' songs glorify raids and victories, yet the voices of widows remain erased. A fragment from Bede's ecclesiastical history hints at this silence, noting how the conquered women fell into strange households, their tongues stilled. And genetic studies on Viking settlements in northern England show sudden shifts in maternal lineages, proof that widows and daughters were absorbed by force into Norse bloodlines. Behind every torch set to a roof, there was a widow. Behind every sword raised, a child who would never see his father again. And so, the battlefield did not end with fire and blood. It continued in the broken lives of women left behind. This was conquest not just of land, but of family, memory, and the very soul of a people. When the smoke of a raid cleared and the villagers gathered what little remained, widows were never left in peace. In Viking society, the act was not just about survival. It was ritual. The Old Norse word kvent meant to marry, but it also meant to claim. A widow was not free to choose. She was a token of conquest, absorbed into the bloodline of the invader. Medieval chronicles hint at this practice. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes how women were taken into strange households, their tongues stilled. What seems like a passing line carries a brutal truth. Widows became living proof of Norse dominance. In some sagas, the taking was described almost as a religious duty. A widow was paraded, her household possessions counted, and then handed into the arms of a new guardian, either a warrior who had earned her through battle or a traitor who purchased her fate. This was not chaos, it was system. The Gragas law code, preserved in Icelandic manuscripts, is blunt. A woman may not live without a guardian. If her husband dies, her kin or lord must find her a match. Freedom was never an option. Archaeology reinforces this harsh order. Records from the slave markets of Jorvik, modern-day York, show women listed by age, skill, and fertility. They were traded alongside cattle and iron, valued in silver coins. One entry from a 10th century transaction notes a woman sold for 2 oars of silver, the same as a good hunting dog. The law and the market worked hand in hand. A widow was either remarried quickly to cement alliances, or she was dragged into the slave economy that spread from Dublin to Kiev. For the Norse, this was wealth creation. For the women, it was a cage. Yet when we turn to the great Viking sagas, the tales of glory, voyages, and battles, we find silence. The widows do not speak. Their voices were erased, their grief edited out of history. but modern science has begun to restore them. A genetic study from the University of Leicester revealed sudden shifts in maternal DNA in Viking settlements across northern England. Local Saxon women had been absorbed into Norse lineages, not by choice, but by force. Each shift in DNA is a trace of the untold story. Women carried off, compelled into foreign bloodlines, their children growing up Viking, but never knowing the language of their mothers. And so, the legacy of conquest was not only in burned villages or stolen treasures. It was written into the bodies of women, into their silence, into the generations that followed. Not every widow submitted quietly. Some resisted, though their names rarely survive in chronicles. Archaeological digs in northern England reveal burnt Norse storage barns, their fires not linked to raids, but to sabotage. The culprits were likely women, enslaved or forced into households, using fire as their only weapon. In sagas, resistance is buried in allegory. The Laxdæla saga tells of women who whispered curses over warriors' weapons, dulling their blades before battle. Scholars argue this reflects memory of real defiance, widows turning their grief into hidden acts of rebellion. These were small victories, often ending in harsher punishment. Yet each spark of resistance showed that silence was never complete. Survival often meant adaptation. Some widows built quiet networks, trading information or goods in hidden marketplaces. Legal fragments from Danelaw, England show unusual property transfers, land suddenly passing through female hands only to disappear again. Historians suspect this was a way for widows to secretly protect wealth from Norse guardians. Christian monasteries also became sanctuaries. A 10th century record from Winchester notes women of foreign tongue seeking shelter with the brothers. These may have been Saxon widows fleeing forced remarriage. For them, faith became a shield where law offered none. And yet, survival often meant submission too. Many women chose to live within Norse households, raising children who bore Viking names. Their resistance was not open revolt, it was the preservation of memory, stories whispered to their children in a mother's fading tongue. The true legacy of this system is not found in chronicles, but in people. Genetic studies across Scandinavia and the British Isles show blended lineages, Norse fathers, local mothers. Entire generations were born from coercion. This was conquest, not just of land, but of bloodlines. Yet even within this, traces of survival remain. Folklore in northern England preserves fragments of Saxon women's voices, songs of mourning woven into lullabies. A line from a 12th century manuscript speaks of the women taken who sing their sorrow into the earth. The Vikings built their power on ships, silver, and steel, but their lasting mark was carved into the silence of the women they claimed. Widows turned into wives, into slaves, into mothers of a future that bore the name of the conqueror, yet carried the memory of the conquered. And so, when we speak of Viking victories, we must also remember the hidden battlefield, the homes, the hearths, and the hearts of those who had no songs written for them.